Trump had an answer for everything. Before this war started, before the first B-2 bomber took off, before the first missile crossed into Iranian airspace on February 28th, his top military commander sat in front of him and laid it out. General Dan Caney, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, told the President of the United States exactly what Iran would do if America attacked. He said Iran would deploy mines in the Strait of Hormuz. He said Iran would use drones. He said Iran would launch missiles at ships. He said American officials had believed this for years, that it was the established, documented war-gamed response that Iran had been preparing and signaling for decades. He said it not once. He said it in several briefings. Trump listened. Trump acknowledged the risk. Then Trump moved forward anyway. And he told his team the reason: Iran would capitulate before it ever got to that point. The people would rise. The regime would collapse. The strait would never close because Iran would surrender before it had the chance. The strait has been closed for 14 days. That gap between what the general said and what the president believed is the entire story of this war in one sentence. And inside that gap, sequenced and deliberate and now fully visible, is the strategy that Iran had actually built, not the strategy that American press conferences are describing. The real one, the one that was never about winning a military exchange, the one that was designed specifically around the assumption that America would dismiss exactly the warnings it received. Here's what that strategy actually looks like, phase by phase. Phase 1. Before the cluster missiles, before the drone boats, before the tanker attacks, Iran destroyed Israel's early warning infrastructure, the radar systems, the sensors that detect incoming threats at long range and feed the data to the interception systems. These were the first targets, not cities, not civilian infrastructure, the eyes. Because Iran understood something about its own cluster munitions that Israeli defense planners had not fully modeled, the bomblets are unstoppable once released, but the window for stopping them is narrow and it depends entirely on early detection. Remove the detection capability first, then the bomblets become not just unstoppable, but also unexpected. Phase 2, the defense systems themselves: Iron Dome, Arrow, David's Sling, THAAD. Each of these systems was targeted, degraded, and in some cases temporarily disabled through sustained missile and drone pressure. Not destroyed. Iran did not need to destroy them. It needed to reduce their operational reliability, deplete their interceptor stockpiles, and force their operators into a state of continuous maximum effort response that degrades both the technology and the humans running it. 65,000 alerts in 12 days. Every alert is a system activation. Every activation costs interceptors, fuel, maintenance cycles, and the focused attention of trained operators who are not sleeping enough. Phase 3, the cluster missiles. Not introduced on day 1. Introduced after phases 1 and 2 had done their work, after the early warning systems were degraded, after the defense systems were depleted, after the interceptor stockpiles had been burning for nearly 2 weeks. A single Iranian ballistic missile carries between 36 and 100 small submunitions, each one approximately 5 kilog, spreading across an area of 10 to 15 kilometers, released at altitude before any interceptor can reach the missile body. The interception rate for the bomblets after release, 0%. Not low, 0. There is no system currently deployed in Israel that can address cluster submunitions once they have separated from the delivery vehicle. And because the early warning systems were degraded in Phase 1 and the defense systems depleted in Phase 2, the window for intercepting the missile body before release has narrowed to the point where it is frequently missed entirely. This is not 3 separate problems. It is one problem sequenced across 3 phases designed to make Phase 3 possible by completing Phases 1 and 2 first. Trump's plan assumed Iran would never reach Phase 3. His assumption was that killing Khamenei, removing the head of the regime, would trigger an uprising, a collapse, a window for the people of Iran to take back their country, exactly as he announced on day 1. To the great people of Iran, he said, the hour of freedom is at hand. When we are finished, take back your government. 14 days later, hundreds of thousands of Iranians marched in Tehran in support of the new supreme leader while missiles landed nearby. Reza Pahlavi, the exiled son of the Shah, the man American planners apparently imagined would return in triumph, has not been mentioned in a single significant news report since the war started. He is not there. He was never coming. And the warning that Israel's own intelligence community had delivered before this war began, that the successor to Khamenei might be more dangerous, not less, and might use the war itself as a rallying tool, proved exactly correct within the first 72 hours. Phase 3 is running. The bomblets are falling. The interception rate is 0. This was always the plan. The U.S. Navy has a name for the Strait of Hormuz right now. The name appeared in reporting from U.S. Navy officials this week, confirming what naval commanders have apparently been telling energy industry representatives in private briefings. The name is Killbox. A kill box is a military term. It describes a defined geographic area in which a defending force has established overlapping fields of fire, sensor coverage, and weapon systems, such that any hostile entry into that area can be engaged from multiple directions simultaneously. The attacker who enters a kill box faces threats from every direction at once with no safe approach vector. It is the military concept of a trap, not a line to be crossed, but a space to be avoided entirely until the conditions creating it have been eliminated. Iran has turned the Strait of Hormuz into a kill box. The 33-kilometer wide passage between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is currently covered by coastal anti-ship missiles positioned on the Iranian shore. Drone boats operating from tunnel networks that survived the bombing campaign, underwater mines whose placement status is actively disputed between American officials, aerial drones that can be launched from deep inland beyond the range of current suppression, and the looming presence of 5,000 Iranian naval mines, one of the largest mine stockpiles in the world, that can be deployed from small, fast attack boats in hours. The U.S. Navy destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels earlier this week. Iran has tunnel networks from which additional vessels can emerge. The mine-laying capability has not been eliminated, it has been reduced. The cost calculation for entering the kill box is now breaking the logic of escort operations entirely. Jeff Curry, Chief Strategy Officer at Carlyle Energy Pathways and one of the world's leading commodity analysts, told The Economist this week that the cost of a single U.S. Navy escort of a commercial vessel through the strait now exceeds the value of the cargo that escort would be protecting. Not approaches, exceeds. The economics of the strait have inverted. Protecting a cargo costs more than the cargo is worth. This is what Iran's strategy is designed to achieve. Not military victory, but economic irrationality. Make the cost of reopening the strait larger than the benefit of the oil that flows through it. There are more than 300 commercial vessels currently stranded in the Gulf. They are waiting for the kill box to become something other than a kill box. Analysts who study Gulf shipping estimate that escorting all 300 ships through the strait one by one at the pace that safety would require could take months, possibly longer. The math does not work, even if the military decides to commit to it. General Caney told Congress this week that the military is prioritizing the elimination of Iran's land-based anti-ship missiles before any escort operations begin. That sequencing is logical. It is also an admission that the strait cannot be opened until an unknown number of hidden, dispersed, mobile Iranian missile batteries across a mountainous coastline are located, targeted, and destroyed in a country that has spent 40 years hardening exactly those assets against exactly this type of suppression campaign. The Navy has been bombing Iran continuously for 2 weeks. The anti-ship missiles on the Iranian coast are still there. Meanwhile, what Iran has been saving for this phase is significant. The source material for this script notes and Iranian military statements have confirmed that Iran deliberately held back its most sophisticated long-range missiles throughout the first 2 weeks of the air campaign, preserving them specifically for the Strait of Hormuz confrontation. Not every missile in Iran's arsenal was fired at Israel. The ballistic missiles flying over Tel Aviv were the ones Iran was willing to expend against Israel. The missiles Iran considers its most strategically valuable have not been used yet. They are designated for the scenario in which American warships attempt to force the strait. The scenario that 2,200 Marines on USS Tripoli and a Navy planning process focused on removing land-based anti-ship systems is apparently building toward. Trump struck Karg Island this week, Iran's primary oil export hub, responsible for roughly 90% of its crude exports before the war. The strike hit 90 military targets on the island, naval mine storage facilities, missile storage bunkers, military infrastructure. The oil processing facilities were deliberately not struck. Trump announced afterward that the oil facilities would be struck if Iran does not stop attacking ships in the strait. This is a warning shot. Iran responded to the Karg Island strike by announcing it would resume loading tankers at the Jask terminal on the Gulf of Oman, south of the strait. Entirely, demonstrating within 48 hours that it had already built an alternative export route that bypasses the very choke point America is threatening to use as leverage. The warning shot landed. Iran routed around it before the smoke cleared. The oil facilities on Karg remain untouched, and the leverage Trump announced is available depends on a threat Iran has already neutralized in advance. Phase 3 is running, and Iran is already thinking about Phase 4. Here is what the general actually told Trump. Not the summary. The specific content is reported by the Wall Street Journal this week from sources with direct knowledge of the briefings. General Caney told Trump that U.S. officials had long believed Iran would deploy mines, drones, and missiles to close the Strait of Hormuz if conflict erupted. He said this in several briefings. He used the word long believed, meaning this was not a new assessment, not an edge case scenario, not the pessimistic projection of a cautious analyst. It was the established consensus of the American intelligence and military planning community, built across years of studying Iran's capabilities and stated intentions. It was the baseline. Trump acknowledged the risk. Trump moved forward. And Trump told his team that Iran would likely capitulate before closing the strait, and even if it tried, the U.S. military could handle it. The White House press secretary responded to this reporting by calling it false, preposterous, and a complete disgrace. Hegseth called it patently ridiculous. Both said the administration had planned for Hormuz's closure for decades, and the idea they didn't think of it was fundamentally unserious. Notice what neither response actually addressed. Neither denied the specific claim that Trump told his team Iran would capitulate before closing the strait. Neither said Trump had a plan for if Iran did not capitulate. Neither explained why. 2 weeks into a war launched on the assumption Iran would surrender quickly, there are 300 ships stranded in the Gulf. The cost of a single escort exceeds the value of the cargo, and the U.S. Navy is describing the strait as a kill box it cannot currently enter. The plan was not that Iran would close the strait and America would handle it. The plan was that Iran would surrender before it got there. That is the specific thing that did not happen. And everything that has gone wrong since, the depleted interceptors, the cluster missiles with 0% interception rate, the tanker attacks, the drone boats, the oil prices, the UN proposal, the stranded ships, the 300 vessels waiting in the Gulf, the Marines on a ship sailing from Japan toward a strait the Navy calls a kill box, all of it flows from that single miscalculation. Israel's intelligence community had warned before this war that the successor to Khamenei might be more dangerous than Khamenei himself, that a military attack on Iran might produce not a collapse but a consolidation, a rallying of Iranian public opinion around the regime, a hardening of the IRGC's resolve. A new supreme leader who was chosen precisely because the enemy rejected him, and who, therefore, could not back down without handing that enemy a victory. That warning, like Kaney's warning, was acknowledged and set aside. The first statement as supreme leader contained 0 references to negotiation. It contained an order: keep the strait closed. It contained a demand: close every American base in the region, or they will be attacked. It contained a vow: vengeance for his father. And it was read by a news anchor on state television because the man who wrote it may be wounded and underground, which means that even if someone wanted to negotiate with him, the physical mechanism for doing so does not currently exist. Trump told the G7 this week that Iran is about to surrender. He told them it was coming in days. 24 hours later, Iran held a massive public rally while missiles landed nearby and its officials kept talking. The strait remained closed. The kill box remained intact. The cluster missiles kept falling. Hegseth says the mission is on plan. He says Iran's missiles are down 90%. He says drone volume is down 95%. He says everything is proceeding exactly as the plan required. But the plan required Iran to surrender before the cluster missiles were needed. The plan required the people to rise up before the strait was closed. The plan required a new supreme leader who was weaker and more desperate and more willing to negotiate. The plan required Reza Pahlavi to be relevant. None of those things happened. Everything the general warned about happened instead. The bomblets are falling on Israeli cities at 0% interception. The strait is a kill box. 300 ships are stranded. The UN is being proposed as the condition for reopening. The French soldier is dead in Iraq. The KC-135s are being repaired in Saudi Arabia. In Iran, the country that has no conventional navy left, no functional air force, no carrier groups, no bunker busters, no B-2 bombers, no THAAD batteries, no stealth fighters, Iran is setting the terms of every conversation happening about this war. Not from a position of military superiority, but from a position of having planned correctly for what the other side would do and having built a strategy that did not depend on the other side making good decisions. The general warned Trump. Trump had an answer. The answer was wrong. The plan is still running Iran's.